All right, so here it is. It is week 5 in the NHL, and it's time for the weekly power rankings. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and a subscribe. Let's talk about this week's NHL power rankings. All right, so let's start it off looking in the Eastern Conference as we usually do, and the Metropolitan Division to start things off. So starting at number 8, staying at number 8 this week, we have the New Jersey Devils, 2-5-3 to start the season, and a disappointing 0-1-1 this week. They played the Arizona Coyotes at home earlier this week, pretty much last week almost at this point. They haven't played a lot this week. The Arizona Coyotes, a pretty hot Arizona Coyotes team coming into the game, coming off a back-to-back with the New York Islanders. So they lost that game 5-3, unfortunately. They did not play too well in that game. Just weren't able to get anything really going. Definitely some frustration. And then you play the Tampa Bay Lightning at home, and this is really a wonky game. It seemed like the Devils and the Tampa Bay Lightning were just exchanging punches throughout most of this game. Tampa Bay would actually be down 5-3 at one point, and then the Devils would come back, actually take the lead 6-5. Actually, they would come back, tie the game, then the Devils would score, and then the Devils end up scoring with less than a minute left in the third period to tie the game at 6. But it was all for naught because they ended up losing in overtime, sending the fans happy or unhappy once again in New Jersey. There were boos. They were, some situations with Taylor Hall kind of starting to speak out now. PK Subban a little bit more easy on the fans because pretty much the product has not been great, and he admitted himself he has not been good, specifically in the game against the Tampa Bay Lightning. So there's definitely a little bit of ownership from PK, but you got to put it on the ice. They're going to continue to boo you, and Taylor Hall complaining that they're booing him and the rest of his team. Things are not boding well heading into the fall. Going through into the winter. In terms of this talk about Taylor Hall, you would hope that it would get extinguished at some point, but it only seems to be fueling the fire now that he is talking out publicly about the situation in New Jersey. So, not a great thing for the Devils. So taking a look at number 7, staying at number 7 this week is the New York Rangers, 4-5-1 to start the season and 1-1 this week. So they had a pretty interesting week. They played the Boston Bruins on Sunday at home, where they ended up losing that game 7-4 to the Bruins. Now the Bruins have been red hot to start the season, and they were pretty much blowing out the Rangers for most of this game. The score is actually a little more respectable than it was most of the game. The Rangers actually scored a couple of goals late. Patrice Bergeron got a hat trick in that game, and Marchand got a 2-goal game. So the Rangers definitely have some issues. Specifically in that game, they gave up a lot of goals. Just not too great. A couple of empty netters though, so it was a little bit closer. But throughout most of the game, it was 5-1, 5-2 throughout most of this game. And then they would play the Tampa Bay Lightning at home. Ooh, the Tampa Bay Lightning have been back, moving up again a little bit, climbing back up, playing some good hockey. But the Rangers would pull off that one 4-1 at home. A good game for the New York Rangers. Anthony DeAngelo looking pretty solid for the New York Rangers. Artemi Panarin is continuing his success so far. He's definitely enjoying his time with the Rangers. But Kaapo Kakko is still struggling a little bit on this Rangers team. He's been moved around a little bit, but got to keep him on that top line. They're going to find consistency. He's playing with the right players. He just needs to get things going. He's still adjusting, and I think it's going to take a little time, but he is still a very good player. Definitely don't lose hope on Kaapo Kakko quite yet. So taking a look at number 6, actually moving down a spot this week. Pretty disappointing week for this team was the Columbus Blue Jackets. They're 5-5-2 this season, 0-2-0 this week. They would head to Philadelphia. Okay, could we just explain what the hell happened in this game last Saturday? The Columbus Blue Jackets were up 4-2, something like that, 4-3. They would leave 4 goals in the third period in the last 9 minutes and would lose this game 7-4. What happened to the Columbus Blue Jackets in that one? Definitely a stunning game in that regard I don't think the Philadelphia fans were too upset about that, but still, nonetheless, a crazy game. John Tortorella obviously was not too happy in the post-game interviews with that game. But then they would have a chance to redeem themselves against a pretty hot Edmonton Oilers team, and unfortunately, they lost that one to the Oilers 4-1, led by Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid. The goaltending has not been great in Columbus. That was something that we talked about earlier. Heading, in the season preview, was the goaltending is going to be a little interesting, a little shaky, because Korpisalo is, he's still fairly young, and he really hasn't adapted to a starting goaltender. That's been an issue for him, and he had some flashes last season to maybe think that he could be, the guy taking over the net, from Bobrovsky, but not a great start so far for him this year. So taking a look at number 5, we have the Philadelphia Flyers moving up a spot this week, taking Columbus's spot at 5. They are 5-5-1 to start the season, 1-2 this week. They would play the Columbus Blue Jackets in that game we talked about, a wild 7-4 victory at home last Saturday. I'm sure the fans started leaving the building when it was 4-3, but they ended up coming back and winning that game in pretty shocking fashion, to say the least. Then they would play the New York Islanders on Sunday, so the second of a back-to-back in New York, where they would lose that one to the Islanders 5-3. So not a great result there for the Flyers in that one. They did not play their best against the Islanders in that game, and the goaltending has been a little bit of an issue here. We knew Brian Elliott would be a little bit of an issue. We knew that, but Carter Hart has struggled definitely on his own this season as well. So then taking a look at the other game they played, a tough game on the road in Pittsburgh, a in-state rival, the Pittsburgh Penguins. They would drop that one 7-1. That's right, they gave up a touchdown to the Pittsburgh Penguins. Again, just the goal scoring has been an issue. They're averaging around 6.5 goals given up per game. That's way too many for the Philadelphia Flyers. So hopefully things turn around, but not a great result this week for the Flyers. So taking a look at number 4, staying at number 4 this week, we have the Pittsburgh Penguins, who are 8-5 to start the season and 2-0 this week. So a good week for the Penguins after a pretty rocky week last week. They did stay at number 4, but that's because the teams ahead of them have been pretty strong themselves. So the Penguins did not move up this week, but they did have a pretty solid week. They beat the Dallas Stars on the road, took an advantage of a Dallas Stars team that's been struggling a little bit, 3-0 victory in Dallas, and then they would have that great game against the Philadelphia Flyers in a 7-1 rout in that one. So a pretty good week for the Pittsburgh Penguins. They were expected to win both of these games. They were hoping to win both of these games at least. You knew it would be tough against Philly. It's a rivalry. And Dallas, who's been struggling a little bit. They've been pretty good at home recently, though. So that's good that they were able to pick up a victory on the road there. But it wasn't enough for me to move them up because the teams they beat really haven't been all that great. So it was hard to move them up. So it was easier just to keep them at number 4. But the Penguins continue to roll. Hopefully they start to get a little bit more healthy. Guys start coming back. And, some issues with Evgeny Malkin that I'll probably get into in another video. But besides that, Pittsburgh is finding a way to continue to win. And they are 8-5 right now. So taking a look at number 3, staying at number 3 this week, we have the New York Islanders, who are 8-3 right now and 2-0 this week. They went into Ottawa, played a pretty bruising game against the Ottawa Senators. Went up to Ottawa and picked up a 4-2 victory in a gritty, fight-out game against the Ottawa Senators. The Senators showed some life, something I really didn't expect. But they played fairly well in that game. A couple of things I didn't like too much. We'll get into that when I talk about Ottawa. But Ottawa ended up dropping that one, and the Islanders pick up a big road victory. And then Sunday, they played a game at home against the Philadelphia Flyers and beat their division rivals 5-3 at home. Pretty solid game for the Islanders. Derek Brassard has been on fire, scoring a goal against the Ottawa Senators and the Philadelphia Flyers, as well as a game last Thursday where he scored. So he has been red hot here recently for the Islanders. And the Islanders are picking up some depth scoring, something that we thought would be an issue last season, but they continue this year. After seeing spotty moves made by Lamoriello, the team is continuing to find a way to get things going for the Islanders. So they stay at number 3 this week. And then staying at number 2 is the Carolina Hurricanes, 8-3-1 this season and 2-0 this week. They were at home to start this week against the Chicago Blackhawks, a 4-0 shutout victory at home. And then they beat the Calgary Flames 2-1 in a grind-out win against the Flames. So a good week for the Carolina Hurricanes. The Calgary Flames are a pretty decent team in the West, so that's a big win. And then they took advantage of a Chicago team that has really been struggling, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But a big week for the Carolina Hurricanes. Not too much to talk about. The Hurricanes are rolling and doing pretty well right now. So then staying at number 1 this week, we have the Washington Capitals. We're definitely going to have some competition over the next week or two, but they continue to roll 9-2-3 on the season and 2-0 this week. They would beat the pretty strong starting Vancouver Canucks on the road in Vancouver, a 5-4 shootout victory, a game they came back from and won. They were down in that game, were able to come back and get the victory in a shootout. And then they went to Toronto and kind of did the same thing to the Leafs. They beat the Maple Leafs 4-3 in Toronto, an overtime victory in that one. So the Washington Capitals hold down the top spot in the Metropolitan Division. Just a quick rundown at number 8, the New Jersey Devils. Number 7, the New York Rangers. Dropping down a spot, the only team to drop this week is the Columbus Blue Jackets at number 6, the Philadelphia Flyers at 5, Pittsburgh at 4, the New York Islanders at 3, the Carolina Hurricanes hold up at 2, and the Caps stay on top at number 1. All right, so taking a look at the other Eastern Conference division, we have the Atlantic Division. So starting things off, taking a look at number 8, we have the Ottawa Senators staying at number 8 this week. A pretty solid week overall for the Ottawa Senators. We'll get into that. They were 3-7-1 here to start the season. 11 games in, not too great. 1-1 this week. So taking a look at the first game against the Islanders, they played fairly well. The Islanders were definitely the better team, but there were definitely some instances in this game. The Islanders had a short bench, and the Ottawa Senators seemed to be taking advantage of that. They actually pushed Matt Martin into the open gate. Again, whether it was on purpose or not, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. That's not really what was the upsetting part. It was after that, knowing the Islanders were down. Again, they're playing the game, whatever, but I didn't really like that they were trying to make the Islanders pick fights and just really, make the Islanders bench weaker than it already was. So I didn't really like that too much. The Islanders actually said, expect a pretty tough game next time. These guys will remember this game. So Ottawa better be on their toes for the next game against the Islanders, whenever that is. But nonetheless, Ottawa has played fairly well. Kachuk has played pretty well. The goaltending has been okay. Could be better, could be worse, definitely. Giving up 3 goals a game this week, giving up 7, so actually 6 in 2 games, so could have been better for Ottawa. But then looking at the other game, they beat the San Jose Sharks at home 5-2. Take that, Erik Karlsson, who has struggled in San Jose. We'll talk about the Sharks later, but they pick up a victory in a game for pretty much the winless teams battling it out for the bottom, and Ottawa ended up winning that game. So definitely both those games, I think, are games that Ottawa fans could at least be happy about a little bit. You get a little revenge on Karlsson, if you call it that, and you played a pretty hard-fought game against the Islanders, even though the results weren't there in that one. They definitely fought in that game. And then at number 7, staying at number 7, this team is very close to being the worst team over the past 2 weeks for sure, is the Detroit Red Wings. So they are 4-8-1 to start the season, 1-1-1 this week. They dropped a game against the red-hot Buffalo Sabres 2-0 at home. They would lose to the St. Louis Blues 5-4 in overtime, and they lost to the Edmonton Oilers 3-1 again at home. So a home stand did not go so well so far for the Detroit Red Wings. just finding ways to lose, it seems like. I mean, they did play St. Louis, who has been on the rise a little bit. They had a little bit of a dip between games 5 and 9, but they've started to come back to life. So that's a pretty difficult team. They were able to get that to overtime. But then the Edmonton Oilers come in and kind of do their thing. Buffalo, again, it's a tough week for the Detroit Red Wings, but considering where things started, they were on a roll. They were toward the top of these power rankings. And they're pretty close to being number 8 with another week like this. Just Detroit's really struggling, and I've said it before, I'll say it again, the goaltending has been concerning for me for Detroit. They got to figure that out. So taking a look at number 6, we have the Florida Panthers, who actually moved down a spot this week. And I think that's a little unfair, but because of one team that really rose in this week's power rankings, they were unfortunately a victim to that. So we have a 6-3-4 record for the Florida Panthers, 2-1 this week. They went up to Edmonton and beat the Edmonton Oilers 6-2. They did lose to the Vancouver Canucks toward the end of their Western Canadian road trip, a 7-2 loss against the Vancouver Canucks. And they went up to Colorado and won that game 4-3 in overtime. They had a late goal to tie the game, sent it to overtime, and were able to get the win in overtime against the Colorado Avalanche, who have been talked very highly throughout the first 10 games of the year. So a pretty big victory for Florida. And there's a team that, besides the Vancouver game, they played pretty well on this road trip. The Vancouver game being a lone exception, but Vancouver has looked very solid. So a good week overall for Florida. They did move down a spot. Now looking back, I'm a little bit annoyed that I moved them down, but because of one team that was below them was just way too good not to move them up. So unfortunately, Florida went down, as did these other teams that we'll talk about. So moving down a spot at number 5, we have the Tampa Bay Lightning. This week they are 6-4-2 to start the season, 1-1-1 this week. So kind of a weird week for the Tampa Bay Lightning. They would play at home against the Nashville Predators. They were kind of lulled to sleep at home in a 3-2 overtime loss. It was a close game throughout most of the way, but they weren't able to beat the Predators at home. Then they would start a little bit of a Northeast road trip against the New York Rangers, where they dropped that one in the Garden 4-1. And then they would end up playing a crazy whack game against the New Jersey Devils, where they end up coming out on top thanks to a Tyler Johnson overtime game winner, 7-6 being the final. So definitely a little bit of inconsistency to start the season for Tampa. There's a very good team in Tampa Bay. They have all these players, but they just seem really weird to start this year. They seem to have some issues here and there. There's definitely some imperfections with this team, but they have such a good roster. It's hard to find out. It's hard to find flaws with this team, but it seems it's all mental, and that seems to be the issue. They have the skill, but the structure and stability is a little bit concerning for Tampa. But they're finding ways to win a couple of games. They're number 4, so no reason to panic, but definitely something to keep an eye on. So speaking of panic, taking a look at number 4, moving down a spot this week is the Toronto Maple Leafs, who are 6-5-3 to start the season, 1-1-1 this week. They would beat the San Jose Sharks at home 4-1. Patty Marleau's return to Toronto was spoiled by the Maple Leafs winning that one at home. They would head up to Montreal and lose to the red-hot Montreal Canadiens 5-2 in Montreal on Saturday night in Canada. They did lose that one. And then they played a pretty hot Washington Capitals team where they lost at home 4-3 in overtime. So the Toronto Maple Leafs, there's a lot of talk about the Leafs right now, really throughout most of Canada, and not for the best reasons. Now they have some issues on the back end. Jake Muzzin will hopefully return quickly, as he is out with a Charlie horse. So it's not like he broke a femur or something like that. He didn't break anything, but that is a painful injury. So hopefully he comes back quickly and recovers to maximum health. But now they have an issue where Zach Hyman will be coming back onto the roster, and salary cap is going to be an issue for Toronto. So the thing they've been holding off throughout most of the summer, we'll get it done. Zach Hyman's pretty much ready to come back. So Toronto is going to have to make a move over the next week or two. and trying to figure out what they're going to do to get Zach Hyman back in the lineup. So with that said, Toronto does move down to number 4 because their rival up north in Quebec, oh no, sorry, the Nordiques aren't back yet. But the Montreal Canadiens, on the other hand, move up to number 3 this week in the power rankings. 7-4-1 to start the season. 3-0 this week. They beat those Toronto Maple Leafs 5-2 at home. They beat a pretty solid Arizona Coyotes team on the road in Arizona by a score of 4-1. And then they beat the Vegas Golden Knights in overtime in Vegas 5-4 in overtime. So the Montreal Canadiens, look at the Canadiens, a team that was down at number 6 last week, bumps up to number 3 this week. The other 3 teams in between were a little bit mediocre, and they were able to take advantage of that. They had a really great week, and they are 3-0 on the week, placing themselves, as a gap between the Boston Bruins and the Buffalo Sabres, and the Toronto Maple Leafs, Tampa, and Florida. They're kind of the in-between right now. And hopefully they keep this going. They really had a great week this week. Carey Price has been good. Max Domi, some of that youth has been good as well. That's been called up here and there. Finding ways to get goals, and they're scoring more than they give up. And at the end of the day, that gives you a 3-0 record over the week. So good week for the Montreal Canadiens. Should pat yourselves on the back. As Canadian fans, definitely have been waiting for this breakout of this team, and it's finally happening right now. So taking a look at number 2, getting knocked off the top spot this week is the Buffalo Sabres, who are 9-2-2 on the season, 1-0-1 this week. They did beat a struggling Detroit Red Wings on the road in Little Caesars Arena. That's right, it's called Little Caesars Arena in Detroit. No judge, but definitely a different name for an arena. But that's besides the point. The Detroit Red Wings dropped that one to the Sabres 2-0. A shutout for the Sabres on that road win there. Very solid road game overall for the Buffalo Sabres. And then they beat, unfortunately, they did lose to the Arizona Coyotes, coming back home 3-2 in a shootout. So that's a pretty good Arizona team. You beat a divisional opponent in the Detroit Red Wings, who have been struggling, so that's good. But the Arizona Coyotes, who have been pretty good themselves, unfortunately, they were not able to get the victory there. They did get knocked off the top spot because at number 1 is the Boston Bruins, taking back their spot. They didn't like Buffalo up at the top, so they said, you know what, we're going to take that back. And they did exactly that this week. 9-1-2 to start the season, and 3-0 this week, so an undefeated week for the Boston Bruins. They beat the defending Stanley Cup champions at home, shutting them out in a feisty one last Saturday, a 3-0 victory over the St. Louis Blues. They would head to Madison Square Garden and beat the New York Rangers on the road 7-4. And then they would beat the San Jose Sharks coming back home with a 5-1 victory in that one. So a really solid week. Really, none of these games were terribly close. Really, besides the St. Louis game, the Boston Bruins have been so good, and really the only game that was concerning for that defense and goaltending was the Ranger game, and 2 of those goals were pretty much in the last 10 minutes, and kind of weird goals, and definitely a game that Boston coach Bruce Cassidy won't be happy with the final score, but overall his team played very solid this week. They took advantage of San Jose, who struggled a little bit. The Rangers have been kind of mediocre, maybe on the lower end. And the St. Louis Blues are taking advantage of a weaker division, so we don't really know where they are at throughout most of the league. But they did lose to a very solid team in Boston. No, this is not revenge for the Boston Bruins. Sorry, the St. Louis Blues have the hardware. The Bruins do not. Maybe this year, though, for the Bruins, because they're definitely showing that they have a little bit of a revenge tour this year, looking to get back on a run. Some teams kind of have a hangover after a Stanley Cup final run like that. Not much rest, but Bergeron has played very well. Brad Marchand has been playing good. The goaltending has been very solid. And that top pairing of Charlie McAvoy and Zdeno Chara has been unreal. Definitely one of the better pairings in the NHL right now. So Boston Bruins continue to find ways to get things going, and they get back to number 1 in the Atlantic. So a quick rundown again. At number 8, the Ottawa Senators, the Detroit Red Wings at number 7, the Florida Panthers at number 6, the Tampa Bay Lightning at number 5, Toronto down to number 4, Montreal with the big bump this week up to number 3, the Buffalo Sabres get knocked off the top spot at number 2, and the Boston Bruins reel their way back to number 1 in the Atlantic. So let's take a look at the Western Conference. Okay, so looking at the Pacific Division, we have at number 8, staying at number 8 this week, is the very disappointing right now San Jose Sharks. 4-8-1 on the season and 0-3 this week. They went up to Toronto. Patrick Marleau came back to Toronto for the first time, and they couldn't get the win. They lost to the Leafs 4-1 in Toronto. Would play a very struggling Ottawa Senators team, but the Senators had life in this game and would beat the San Jose Sharks 5-2. And you couldn't win in Toronto. You couldn't even win in Ottawa. Then they have to go to Boston. Yep. They lost to the Boston Bruins. You know what happens here. They lose 5-1 to the Boston Bruins, who have been red hot. But the San Jose Sharks have been anything but red hot recently. Since Logan Couture's comments, his team has won 1 game of like 6. So they've really struggled here out of the gate in San Jose. Expectations were pretty high, but they lost a lot of pieces over the summer, and it really looks like it's affecting this team. They are struggling, and it's on full display right now. Not too great 13 games into the season for the San Jose Sharks. Goaltending hasn't been great. Defense hasn't been great. Erik Karlsson really hasn't looked too great for the for the San Jose Sharks. I don't know. There's a lot of issues with San Jose right now. They really relied on a lot of youth coming into this season. When we did the season preview, the roster looked very different, specifically in the depth for the San Jose Sharks, and the defense isn't really working. So with everything kind of not working great and meshing well, you end up having the record that the Sharks have right now. So taking a look, not too surprising, unfortunately, this week. At number 7, staying at 7, is the Los Angeles Kings, who are 4-9 to start the season, and a really abysmal 0-3 this week. They went to Minnesota and lost to the Minnesota Wild 5-1. They played the Chicago Blackhawks, who have been struggling as well. They would lose that one 5-1 as well. Then they would play the Vancouver Canucks at home and play at least a somewhat entertaining game. But they ended up losing that one as well. The results weren't there. They lose to the Canucks 5-3 at home. So they give up 15 goals in 3 games this week for the Los Angeles Kings. They're not scoring goals, and they're giving up way too many goals. Jonathan Quick made some decent saves, a highlight save this week, but pretty much besides that, not a great week for Jonathan Quick and the Kings. I don't know, it's just really frustrating looking at this Kings team. They just seem to have no life right now. They're really struggling, and they find themselves toward the bottom of this division. The only reason I have them at 7th and not 8th is just because I feel like they're a little bit better than San Jose, but that could very easily change next week. It was tough finding who would be 7th or 8th. Just ended up leaving them because they were both that bad this week. There's definitely a gap between Los Angeles and San Jose compared to really the rest of that Pacific Division, because it's pretty solid right now. We'll get into that, but man, Los Angeles and San Jose, I hate to say this, but this game is becoming a speed game, and it seems like Los Angeles and San Jose are falling behind in that category right now. Let's take a look at number 6. Staying at number 6 this week is the Calgary Flames. 7-6-2 to start the season. 1-1-1 this week. We're seeing a lot of 1-1-1s this week, but I digress. So they went up to Winnipeg. Actually, they went to Regina to play in the Heritage Classic game, which was an unbelievable game. That's the perfect outdoor game. They played that game and lost, unfortunately, in overtime. A Winnipeg goal late in the final 10 minutes of the third period, and then a overtime winner by Adam Lowry. Unfortunately, was the difference for the Calgary Flames, unable to win that one in a heartbreak up in Regina. They would play the Carolina Hurricanes at home, or on the road in Carolina, excuse me. Lost that one 2-1. But then they would get their one win this week in Nashville, a 6-5 overtime victory in Nashville. So overall, not a great week for the Calgary Flames. Their big marquee game pretty much of the season was against the Winnipeg Jets. Unbelievable jerseys, though, on both sides. I really liked Winnipeg's. I didn't get the white one, but I knew I had to get this one. Too perfect. But nonetheless, 7-6-2. They're under 500. They're finding ways to pick up points. They did pick up an overtime point this week, so they did get a point. But you're still, this is a tough division right now. You look at some of the teams ahead of them that we'll get into now. They're falling behind a little bit, but they're definitely better than the two teams below them. But this division is going to be a tough division this season. A division that's usually looked upon as being a weaker division. Definitely showing some parity in the NHL this season because this division has looked pretty solid to start the year. So taking a look at number 5, moving down a spot, and they had a pretty good week. Just one of the teams ahead of them was very good, and we'll be talking a lot of praise about that team later on. But taking a look at number 5, we have the Arizona Coyotes, who are 7-4-1 on the season, 2-1 this week. They headed to New Jersey, beat a very struggling New Jersey Devils team 5-3 on the road. They beat the Buffalo Sabres, who have been pretty good, 3-2 in a shootout win. And then they lost, unfortunately, at home against a Montreal Canadiens team who has been on fire. So they played a couple of teams, a mixed bag this week. They played a struggling Devils team, and then they played two pretty good teams in their respective Atlantic Division in Buffalo and Montreal. So pretty tough schedule overall. But again, looking at Arizona, they were on a 12-game point streak up until last week. There's definitely a little bit of a regression this week, but they did pick up 2 wins, which is very important. They were able to, you're not going to go 3-0 every week, and I get that, but definitely watching their games, the Buffalo game, they really had to grind that one out, which is good, and the Devil game, they were just able to hold on and get the victory there. They did lose to Montreal, but Montreal has kind of come out of the blue and looking very solid. So not a bad week overall for the Coyotes. So moving down a spot, this killed me. At number 4 is my Anaheim Ducks. The Anaheim Ducks lose a couple of games this week, but they did get the job done overall. We'll get into that. 8-6 on the season for the Anaheim Ducks. 2-1 this week. Starting off the week, things looked very positive. They went up to Colorado and beat the Colorado Avalanche 5-2 in Colorado. A very solid road game for the Anaheim Ducks in that one. Fortunately, they would play Vegas in the second game. They did lose 5-2 in Vegas. Then they put up a pretty nice touchdown against the Winnipeg Jets, winning 7-4 over the Jets. So a solid win there. Pretty solid week overall for Anaheim. The record is starting to come back to reality. They are 8-6. Definitely the last 2 weeks haven't been too great, but they're 2-1 this week. Kind of the same story as the Arizona Coyotes. You can't go undefeated every week, and they played a pretty solid Vegas team. So unfortunately, that's going to happen here and there. Vegas is not an easy place to play, so they're able to at least pick up 4 out of a possible 6 points this week. So, Anaheim did lose Josh Manson, which I think is going to be a killer for that defense. That's why they wanted to bring back Lucas Spiza. Fortunately, he was claimed by the Winnipeg Jets, so things didn't work out there. Definitely going to be looking for a defenseman, I would think, more than ever now that Josh Manson is out. So hopefully Manson comes back quickly because they need him. John Gibson has been unreal, as he's always been, but as well as Ryan Miller, who's been pretty solid himself. Okay, so taking a look at this team who going to have a lot of praise for this week. The Vancouver Canucks are up at number 3 this week in the power rankings for the Pacific Division, 8-3-1. You look at that, you're like, what the heck happened to the Vancouver Canucks? They kind of shot out of a cannon and really got a nice party this week. 8-3-1, 2-0-1 on the week. So they picked up a point in all 3 games this week. They did lose to the Washington Capitals 6-5. They really should have been 3-0 this week, but that game they were up on the Capitals at home and unfortunately blew the lead late. The Capitals stormed back and won it in overtime 6-5. They beat the Florida Panthers, who have been pretty okay. They beat them 7-2, kind of put them away and stomped on them. And then they played the Los Angeles Kings in Hollywood and were able to pick up the victory on the road 5-3 against a struggling Los Angeles Kings team. Like I said, this team is finding great goaltending between both goaltenders, and they're finding ways to win games. Thatcher Demko, as well as Jacob Markstrom, who's on the final year of his contract, we talked about he may be looking for a good season to try and get some dough at the end of this year. He's definitely motivated. Demko looking to kind of overtake the starting goaltender position in Vancouver, so it's a great combination. This team is on fire. Brock Besser got a hat trick the other night, so he's playing fairly well. They're finding ways to get wins, and that was actually the first hat trick in LA since the 70s, I think, for the Vancouver Canucks. So good job this week for the Canucks. Really moved up in the power rankings. This won't be the last time in this video we're talking about Vancouver. We'll talk about that later, though. So stay tuned to the end for that. So staying at number 2, though, this week is the Vancouver Canucks. The Vegas Golden Knights, 8-5-1 on the season, 1-1-1 this week. Again, with the 1-1-1 records. They did lose to the Colorado Avalanche at home, 6-1. A pretty tough game at home there for Vegas. They would beat the Anaheim Ducks, come back with the victory 5-2 at home. And then they did lose in overtime at home against the Montreal Canadiens in overtime by a score of 5-4. So overall, the Vegas Golden Knights playing okay. They're just staying steady, and we've talked about that now for the past couple weeks for Vegas. They haven't had these 5-game winning streaks and stuff like that, but they've just been consistent and consistently good, and that's what this team has been throughout their existence so far. Gerard Gallant has really kept this team in check. Playing in a city like Vegas, it's very easy to lose focus and things like that, but they have played very well in Vegas, and they're finding success continually. Marc-Andre Fleury has played well. As long as he can hold up throughout the entire season, that's my one concern heading into the second half for Vegas, would be that Fleury gets a little banged up and tired. He had an unbelievable Halloween costume, so that was great to see him and his wife with that costume. But nonetheless, Vegas stays at number 2 in this week's Power Rankings. All right, so staying at number 1 in the Pacific is the Edmonton Oilers, led by Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid. They have a 9-4-1 record, a 1-2 record this week. They played the Florida Panthers at home, lost that one 6-2. It was the top line for the Florida Panthers really putting away the Oilers in that one. They would lose to the Detroit Red Wings on the road in Detroit 3-1, so that things started getting a little bit alarming here for the Edmonton Oilers. And then they played Columbus and won that one in Columbus 4-1. So what happened this week for the Edmonton Oilers? Well, it's already been talked about heavily how much they relied so far this season on James Neal and his success to start the season, as well as Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid. If you shut down that top line and really just bang away at them, maybe try, and again, you're not trying to injure anybody, but really, make fatigue a factor for these players. Where is the depth to this Oilers team? And I'm saying that seriously and legitimate. I just, I feel like it's the easy go-to thing to say this team has no depth and this and that. I think it's a little bit far-fetched, but it's not far from the truth either. Again, Mike Smith has been unbelievable in goal, and the defense has been average, but it's been good enough because of how great those players on that top line have been for the Oilers to start the year. So if teams start to shut down that top line and tire them out, maybe an injury, dare I say, I really hope not. I really like the Oilers on this run. Those fans are happy for once. Let them enjoy this for a little bit, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because they want to be in the playoffs in April. So still a long ways from there, but through the first month of the season, the Oilers are staying right there. So that's it for the Pacific Division. A quick rundown, real quick. Looking at number 8 is the San Jose Sharks, the Los Angeles Kings at number 7, number 6, the Calgary Flames. Number 5 is the Arizona Coyotes. Number 4, moving down, is the Anaheim Ducks. Moving all the way up to number 3, the big shakeup in this division is the Vancouver Canucks at number 3. The Vegas Golden Knights stay put at number 2. And the Edmonton Oilers hold down the top spot at number 1. All right, so let's finish things off with the Central Division. So taking a look at number 7 in the Central is the Minnesota Wild, staying put at 7, 3-10 to start the season, 1-2 this week. Yay, they got to win. They beat the Los Angeles Kings at home 5-1. Oh, so the win isn't anything. No, I'm kidding. It's still a huge victory, an impressive win, 5-1. They put up some goals against the Kings, taking advantage of a struggling Kings team, but they definitely show that they are not the worst team in the league. Big victory for Minnesota, just to get some confidence in this team, get some good feelings, and they get a victory there. Then they go down to Dallas, and a pretty solid Dallas team at home. They kept it pretty close, 6-3 loss though in Dallas against the Dallas Stars. Then they played the St. Louis Blues in a pretty hard-fought game there for the St. Louis Blues. The Blues end up getting that victory, 2-1. Tough loss on the road for Minnesota. The Wild they've had issues. They were able to get something out of that win at home. They played a decent game against Dallas, who has been surprisingly pretty good at home this season to start things off. And then St. Louis, who is a defending Stanley Cup champion. So that's a tough team to play. So again, you can make excuses all you want. They're 3-10. They've lost 3. They've won 3 games of a possible 13. That's really disappointing for the Minnesota Wild. But they got to win this week, so there's something good to look at. I don't know what to say though. It's a tough situation, and there's definitely a gap between them and the haves to start the season. They're one of the have-nots. Speaking of have-nots, moving down a spot once again this week is the Chicago Blackhawks, moving down to number 6, 3-7-2 to start the season, 1-2 this week. They dropped a game at home against the Carolina Hurricanes. At home, they were shut out 4-0 against the Hurricanes. They played the Los Angeles Kings. They were able to get a 5-1 victory against the Kings. What's up with the Kings giving up 5-1 wins? But they did here in Chicago, kind of giving gifts on their recent road trip, are the Kings. 5-1 victory for the Blackhawks in that one. And then they head to Nashville, a team we usually look at as being the underdog against the Blackhawks. Not so far to start this year. The Nashville Predators win that one handily, 3-0, a shutout again for the Blackhawks. So now we look at the 3 games this week, and 2 of them, they were shut out. They did pick up some goals against the Kings, but the other 2, Carolina, who's a pretty solid team in the Metropolitan Division, and the Nashville Predators, who are pretty solid in the Central, were unable to put up goals against pretty solid defenses. So Blackhawks definitely struggling a little bit. Jonathan Toews has struggled for the Blackhawks. The weird thing is Robin Lehner has played fairly well in net. Definitely not a great week for Lehner this week, but he's still got decent stats considering how the team is playing. We saw what he did last season with the Islanders. That's the one positive really for the Blackhawks right now. You do have DeBrincat signed, so that's a good thing as well. But having Robin Lehner as your starting goaltender, hopefully moving forward, is a good sign for the Blackhawks. But besides that, not too great. So taking a look at a team that's starting to come on the rise a little bit, very slowly, not a big week overall for Dallas, but the Dallas Stars are at number 5 this week, 5-7-1 to start the season, 1-1 this week. They lost to the Pittsburgh Penguins at home, shutout 3-0 at home, thanks to the Pittsburgh Penguins. But then they would beat the struggling Minnesota Wild 6-3 at home. So they're finding goals, but then they're not finding goals. So the consistency, again, has been talked about. The goaltending has been the consistency for this team. That's been their one constant to start the year. Ben Bishop and Anton Hudobin have been very good in goal for the Dallas Stars. They found ways to get wins, but again, you're playing Minnesota, who struggled. Definitely more of a test to where they are would be the Pittsburgh Penguins. They kept it a pretty close game, but they still were shut out. So, it's tough for Dallas. But again, let's look at the positive. They move up in this week's power rankings, thanks to teams being worse than them. But nonetheless, you have a good goaltending tandem. But unfortunately, the other parts of the team aren't doing their part right now. So hopefully they find a little more consistency. But they continue to move up this week's power rankings. They could move up again this week if the team that we are going to talk about now has another week that they had this week. And that is the Winnipeg Jets. At number 4 this week, 6-6, so they're 500, a perfect 500 this to start the season. 1-1 this week. They played the Calgary Flames and got a big victory in the Heritage Classic last Saturday. 2-1 overtime victory in Regina in that game. Unfortunately, they would follow that up in Anaheim with a 7-4 loss in Anaheim. So a kind of a barn burner in Anaheim, just scoring goals back and forth, but we're unable to get the win in Anaheim. So taking a look at number 3, moving down a spot this week, we have the Nashville Predators. 7-3-2 to start the season, 1-0-1 this week. They went down to Tampa Bay and beat a Tampa Bay team that's been pretty mediocre and kind of falling asleep at points, and it looked like they did that in this game against the Predators. The Predators took advantage, 3-2 overtime victory for the Predators in that one. They would play the Calgary Flames at home and not get the result they wanted, exchanging goals again in this game, 6-5 loss in overtime against the Flames. So Nashville's been okay. The defense has been pretty solid here and there. Dante Fabro has looked pretty good for the Predators. The offense has been, getting some depth scoring here and there, and that's been huge. They need that to continue. They just need to give up a couple less goals. That's really going to make a big difference for the Predators. Again, it's easy to sit here and say they need to give up less goals, but I think that's really the difference between them, maybe dropping some of these games that they probably should have won, or like the Calgary game, or not sending games to overtime. They could have possibly lost that game to Tampa. We know what Tampa can do, especially you send them to 3-on-3 in overtime. You don't really want to get in a match like that with Tampa. Unfortunately, fortunately, they were able to get away with it in Tampa. They were not able to do that against Calgary. So moving up a spot, so the St. Louis Blues, you're giving us hope. So moving up to number 2 this week is the St. Louis Blues, 7-3-3 on the season, 2-1 this week. So good week for the Blues. They went to Boston. Their one falter this week being in Boston, 3-0 shutout loss in Beantown. They would take on the Detroit Red Wings in Detroit against a struggling Detroit Red Wings team. Beat them 5-4 in overtime. They did say that it's kind of disappointing that we had to beat them in overtime. We really should have taken care of business sooner than that. And kind of the same scenario in the other game where they played the Minnesota Wild. They caught a Minnesota Wild team on the second of a back-to-back and won 2-1 in that one. So they were able to find a way to win that one. But Alex Pietrangelo came out and said we were kind of hoping for a more defining result. But nonetheless, they get the 2 points. They get 4 points out of a possible 6 this week. The goaltending has looked better. They're finding ways to close out games, specifically that Minnesota game. And the Detroit game was a little bit weird. Again, I'm still a little bit cautiously optimistic with St. Louis. They definitely are showing a little bit of inconsistency from Craig Berube's group here in St. Louis, but I like what they're doing. They're winning the games that they need to win. The game like Detroit and Minnesota, it wasn't pretty, but they find ways to get the win. And they lost to a Boston team who's been very solid. So maybe they're not that upper echelon team. Maybe not a top 5 team in the NHL right now, but definitely a top 10 team, I think, right now. So take a look at number one, once again in the Central Division, is the Colorado Avalanche. So they are 9-3-1 to start the season and 2-1 this week. So this team has definitely come back down to earth a little bit. Are the Colorado Avalanche? I think a lot of that has to do with the loss of Mikko Rantanen and his production due to injury. So hopefully Rantanen comes back quickly and healthy. So definitely a tough loss with Rantanen out. Makes it easier to key in on guys like Nathan MacKinnon and Gabriel Landeskog. So luckily they have some good depth that they acquired in the offseason. Guys like Nazem Kadri to help offset that load a little bit. And Jonas Donskoy as well. So definitely good that they have that in there. Definitely helps with the load up front. They played the Vegas Golden Knights, a 6-1 victory in Vegas. They would play the Anaheim Ducks, unfortunately dropping that one 5-2 against the Anaheim Ducks. But they picked up a big victory against the Chicago Blackhawks, shutting out the Blackhawks 3-0. And then a weird game against the Florida Panthers where they lost 4-3 in overtime. They had the lead, gave it up, and unfortunately lost in overtime. So, yeah, it's showing that they are a little bit of that they aren't immortal to start the season. They started off really good. I believe they won their first 6 or 7 games before dropping that first one. And since then, they've been a little bit back and forth. But if they could stay ahead of the curve every week, that's really important. They pick up 5 out of a possible 7 points this week. 6 out of 8 points. So not a bad week overall. But again, could be worse. So that's it for this week's Power Rankings. Just a quick rundown again of the Central. Number 7 is the Minnesota Wild. Number 6, the Chicago Blackhawks. The Dallas Stars move up to number 5. The Winnipeg Jets are at number 4. The Nashville Predators at number 3. St. Louis back up at number 2. And the Colorado Avalanche hold their spot at number 1 in the Central. So that's it for this week's Power Rankings. And just a quick thing to look at here is I'm doing something special here for our Halloween edition. It's the day after Halloween. I hope you had a great Halloween. Ate a lot of candy. Hopefully didn't get sick from taking in too much candy. But the Great Pumpkin of the Week. So it's a little fun thing that we did here. A team that I think is being talked about now, specifically in Canada, just as a hint. And I did hint at this team earlier. We would talk about them later. And we're talking about them now. The Great Pumpkin to start this season. A team that I could see, really, kind of taking off is the Vancouver Canucks. The Vancouver Canucks, listen, they have come to life over the past couple of weeks. Really, this past week was their breakout party. 2-0-1 this week. 8-3-1 to start the season. They are 4th in the league for goals against. So they are really taking command there, and they are scoring at a pretty good clips as well. 5th best goals for in the NHL. So the Vancouver Canucks are finding success. Like we talked about with the Canucks, that goaltending has been very solid. The defense has really done well. Alexander Edler has benefited tremendously from the bringing in of Tyler Myers. Tyler Myers, again, that was a move that we talked about. He may be getting overpaid. And he's, he doesn't have the foot speed and things like that. Well, his leadership and his ability to make players around him better. Again, we talk about that all the time. You could be a great player, but if you can make the players around you better, you're really, at a different level. And that is what Tyler Myers has brought. Not talking about Tyler Myers a ton to start the year. We're talking more about Bo Horvat, Elias Pettersson, and Brock Besser. But Tyler Myers, a defenseman, you don't want to be talking about. It's probably better that you don't talk about them because they're making mistakes in their own end. Tyler Myers is doing a good job, as well as Alex Edler, and the Vancouver Canucks are finding some success. So that's it for this week's Power Rankings. I hope you liked that little tidbit there for our Halloween edition. Like I mentioned earlier, I hope you had a great Halloween here in our Halloween special for this week's Power Rankings. So make sure to give this video a thumbs up and a subscribe. Trying to get more content here over the weekend. It's been a crazy week, so hopefully get things going there. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and a subscribe. Thank you for watching, and hope you had a great Halloween.